Some moments arrive with no warning. No sound. No reason. Just a sudden shift in the air that tells you something in your life is about to change. That's what happened to Elena. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind she never thought she would remember years later. The house was quiet, the sky outside was fading into that soft blue-gray color that only appears right before night fully settles in, and she was standing by the kitchen counter, drying the last plate from dinner. Her husband, Mark, had gone upstairs to take a quick shower. His brother, Daniel, was supposed to be leaving soon. They had all spent the day together, nothing dramatic, nothing strange, nothing that hinted at anything unusual. But then Daniel came back into the kitchen. Quietly. Too quietly. Elena didn't even hear him at first. She only noticed him when she looked up and found him standing in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame like he had been there for a while. "Hey," he said softly. That was all. Just one simple word. But something about the way he said it felt different. His voice wasn't tense. It wasn't upset. But there was something beneath it she couldn't quite name, a heaviness, maybe, or the weight of a thought he hadn't decided to share yet. Elena forced a small smile. "Hey, everything okay?" Daniel nodded, but the hesitation in his eyes made the answer feel uncertain. He stepped into the kitchen, moving slowly, like he was being careful with every step. Daniel was usually relaxed, easygoing, the kind of person who always tried to make situations lighter instead of heavier. But not tonight. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked. The sentence landed in the space between them, gentle but unsettling. People rarely ask to talk when things are simple. There's always a reason. There's always something on their mind they can't keep in anymore. Elena nodded even though a small part of her wanted to call for her husband, tell him Daniel needed him instead, or ask what was wrong right away so her imagination wouldn't start forming shadows out of nothing. But she didn't. Maybe the quiet of the house made the moment feel bigger than it really was. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe whatever he wanted to say wasn't serious at all. So she stayed still. She waited. Daniel came closer, but not too close. Just enough to show he had something he needed to say, but also enough distance to show he wasn't trying to make her uncomfortable. He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up at her. "I noticed something today," he said. His voice was calm but thoughtful, like he had repeated the sentence in his mind before speaking it out loud. Elena's fingers tightened around the dish towel she was holding. Noticed something. That phrase alone could mean 1,000 different things. Her mind jumped through all the possibilities. Did something happen earlier? Did she miss something important? Did she say something she shouldn't have? Daniel continued gently. "You seemed different," he said. "Not in a bad way. Just quieter. Like something was on your mind." Elena blinked, caught off guard by how observant he had been. She didn't think anyone had noticed. She barely noticed it herself. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't stress. It was more like a feeling she couldn't name. A sense that something in her life was shifting, even though nothing had changed yet. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Daniel's expression softened when he realized she didn't know what to say. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't demanding an answer. He was simply acknowledging something he had quietly seen. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he added quickly. "I just wanted to check on you." His sincerity was clear. There was no hidden intention, no strange undertone. Just genuine concern. Still, Elena felt her heartbeat pick up in a way she didn't expect. Not out of fear. Not out of worry. But because it truly hit her that someone had noticed something she hadn't shared with anyone, not even her husband. She finally spoke, her voice soft. "I appreciate that. Really. I'm okay. I think. Just a lot on my mind." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes gentle, understanding more than she said aloud. That was when they both heard footsteps coming down the hallway upstairs, her husband finishing his shower, moving around like he normally did, unaware of the quiet moment happening downstairs. Daniel looked upward toward the sound, then back at Elena. And something in his gaze shifted. Just slightly. Not in a troubling way. Not in a dramatic way. But enough for Elena to feel it. Enough for her to know something deeper lingered under his concern, something he wasn't ready to say, not yet. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. As Mark's footsteps moved closer, Daniel exhaled slowly, stepped back, and gave Elena a small, almost bittersweet smile. And in that quiet second before her husband entered the room, she felt it again. That something was off. Something real. Something she couldn't ignore anymore. Some conversations stay with you long after they end. Not because they were dramatic, but because they revealed something you didn't know someone noticed. For the rest of that evening, Elena kept replaying Daniel's words in her mind. She hadn't expected him to see through her calm expression. She hadn't expected him to pause in the doorway the way he did. And she definitely hadn't expected the look in his eyes, gentle, searching, almost protective in a quiet way. When Mark walked into the kitchen, everything shifted back to normal. He wrapped an arm around her waist, kissed the top of her head, and started chatting about a small plumbing issue he found upstairs. Daniel stepped back smoothly, giving them space, acting as if nothing unusual had just happened. And maybe nothing had. Maybe it was just a simple moment she was reading too deeply into. But the feeling stayed. Daniel stayed only a few more minutes before heading out the door. He told Mark they'd catch up later in the week. He gave Elena a polite smile, polite, but not distant, and then he left, closing the door with a soft click. Silence settled inside the house again. Mark turned to her, noticing the thoughtful look she hadn't realized she still had on her face. "You okay?" he asked, rubbing his hand gently along her arm. She smiled, but it was small. "I'm fine. Just tired." It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. They finished cleaning the kitchen together before heading upstairs. Mark talked about work, the upcoming family dinner, and a funny story he forgot to tell earlier. Everything was normal, familiar, comfortable. But underneath that comfort, a question quietly tugged at Elena. Why did Daniel notice something even she struggled to explain? That night, when she lay beside her husband, she stared at the ceiling longer than she intended. The room was dark, except for the faint sliver of moonlight pressing through the curtains. Mark fell asleep quickly, he always did, his steady breathing filling the space beside her. Yet her thoughts refused to settle. It wasn't that something was wrong with her marriage. She loved Mark deeply, and she knew he loved her just as much. But Daniel's words brought something into focus, something she wasn't sure she had ever talked about with anyone. A heaviness in her chest. A sense of being pulled in too many directions. A feeling she had been holding inside without realizing how heavy it had become. The next morning, the house felt brighter, but her thoughts were still murky. Mark left early for work. Elena stood by the doorway waving him off, then slowly closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. She needed fresh air. Something simple. Something grounding. So she grabbed her light jacket and went for a short walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that wakes you up without being harsh. She wasn't expecting to see anyone she knew. But as she turned the corner by the park, she saw Daniel sitting on one of the benches, head bowed over his phone. Her heart did a small, startled jump. She almost turned around, not because she didn't want to talk to him, but because she didn't know what she would say if he brought up yesterday. Instead, she took a quiet breath and kept walking. Daniel looked up just as she approached. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something softer. "Elena," he said, standing up. "I didn't think I'd see you here." "I just needed some air," she replied gently. He nodded, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. The morning breeze ruffled his hair slightly, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel exhaled. "Hey, about yesterday," he said carefully. "I hope I didn't overstep." Elena shook her head immediately. "No. You were being kind. I wasn't uncomfortable." He studied her expression, making sure she meant it. "I just worry sometimes," he said quietly. "You've always been strong. But yesterday, you looked like you were carrying something alone." His words hit deeper than he intended. She swallowed, her voice a whisper. "I didn't realize anyone noticed." Daniel gave a small nod. "I did." He didn't look away. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He simply stood there with a calm, grounded presence that made it hard for her to pretend she was fine. For a moment, Elena didn't know what to say. Her emotions felt tangled, gratitude, confusion, and something she couldn't define mixing together. A gust of wind brushed past them. Daniel moved slightly, as if he had something more he wanted to add. Something he wasn't sure he should say out loud. "Elena," he began softly, "there's something else I should probably." But before he could finish, her phone buzzed loudly in her pocket, breaking the moment. She startled, pulling it out quickly. Mark's name flashed on the screen. And Daniel's unfinished sentence lingered in the morning air like a faint echo she couldn't grasp. What was he going to say? Why did it sound important? And why did she feel a sudden flutter of worry mixed with something she didn't want to name? Some interruptions feel small in the moment. Just a buzzing phone. Just a name on the screen. But later, when you replay the moment in your mind, you realize the interruption kept you from hearing something you weren't ready for. Something that might have changed everything. That was exactly how it felt for Elena. The morning breeze faded into the background as she stared at her husband's name glowing on her phone. She didn't answer immediately. She looked up at Daniel first. "I should take this," she murmured. Daniel nodded, but the quiet in his eyes said he still had something he wanted to tell her. She stepped a few paces away before answering. "Hey," she said softly. Mark's cheerful voice filled her ear. "Good morning again. Just wanted to check in. Did you sleep okay?" She glanced toward Daniel. He had shifted his focus toward the trees as if giving her privacy, though she could tell he was still lost in thought. "I slept fine," she replied, her voice steady but a little distant. "How's work?" They chatted briefly, nothing heavy, nothing unusual. When the call ended, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and slowly returned to Daniel. He looked up the moment she approached. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes. Just Mark checking in." Daniel nodded, but the thought he'd been holding on to earlier hadn't disappeared. It lingered around him like a quiet shadow. "Elena," he said again, careful and gentle, "about what I was trying to say before your phone rang." She took a breath. This time, she was ready to hear him. But then, strangely, Daniel hesitated. It wasn't the same pause as before. It was longer. More uncertain. As if the interruption, that tiny moment, had changed something inside him too. "It's nothing urgent," he finally said. "I think I just misread the moment." Something about his tone made her heart sink slightly. Not in fear. Not in worry. Just disappointment. She wasn't even sure why. Daniel gave her a small, reassuring smile, the kind someone gives when they're trying to protect you from a truth you might not want to hear. "I don't want to make things heavy," he added. "You have enough on your plate." She looked at him carefully. "Daniel, you can talk to me. I don't want you to hold back if something is bothering you." He let out a soft, thoughtful breath. "I know," he said. "But not everything needs to be said right away." She wasn't sure if he was protecting her. Or protecting himself. They walked together for a few minutes, the quiet between them no longer uncomfortable, but full of questions that neither of them knew how to ask. When they reached the small footbridge that crossed the creek, Daniel stopped. "Elena, can I tell you something honest?" he asked. Her heart tightened, waiting. "You don't have to pretend you're fine all the time," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "You're allowed to feel tired. You're allowed to feel overwhelmed. You don't always have to be the strong one." The words hit deeper than he could have known. Because she was tired. More than she ever admitted. Tired of being the one who kept everything steady, even when she felt unsteady inside. She blinked, feeling her throat tighten unexpectedly. Daniel immediately softened, worried he had said too much. "I'm not trying to push," he said quickly. "I just don't want you to feel alone in things you don't talk about." She took a slow breath, grounding herself. "It means a lot," she said quietly. "I didn't realize anyone noticed." He smiled, not bright, not playful, but warm. "I notice more than people think." For a moment, the world around them felt still. The water gently moved beneath the bridge. A few leaves fluttered down from the trees. And Elena felt the kind of understanding she didn't know she needed. But then she caught the way Daniel's eyes shifted. A quiet flicker. A held breath. Something unspoken. Something he was still choosing not to reveal. Before she could ask, Daniel checked his watch. "I should get going," he said softly. "I have a meeting in a bit." "Oh," she whispered, surprised by how disappointed she felt. He stepped back, giving her a small nod. "If you ever need to talk, I mean really talk, you know I'm here, right?" "Yes," she said. And she meant it. Daniel gave one last look, steady, thoughtful, and almost regretful, before turning and walking down the path. Elena watched him go, a lingering unease settling in her chest. He had come so close to telling her something. Something he was holding inside. Something he struggled to hide behind gentle smiles and calm words. As she stood alone on the bridge, one thought pressed heavily into her mind. What was he afraid to say? And why did she feel that whatever it was, it mattered more than she realized? Some truths don't arrive all at once. They show up slowly, in quiet moments, in lingering glances, in unspoken questions you keep pushing away. For Elena, the shift began the moment Daniel walked away that morning. She stood on the little footbridge long after he left, watching the water move beneath her feet. Her thoughts weren't loud or frantic. They were soft, gentle, but impossibly persistent. Daniel had always been kind. Always thoughtful. Always observant in ways that made people feel understood. But lately, something felt different. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that crossed any boundaries. Just a quiet closeness. A subtle awareness. A feeling she hadn't expected to notice. She finally went home, trying to shake off the heaviness. The house greeted her with its usual warmth, the faint smell of coffee from earlier, a soft ray of sunlight slipping through the curtains, the stillness of a place that had always felt safe. But today, even home felt different. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch, hands folded loosely in her lap. A question she didn't want to ask herself hovered in her mind. Why did Daniel seem to understand her so easily? She loved her husband. She knew that clearly, without any doubt. Their marriage wasn't broken. It wasn't perfect, no marriage was, but it was strong. Yet Daniel's gentle concern touched a part of her she didn't realize had been lonely. That realization alone scared her. She decided to distract herself with something simple, cleaning the bookshelves, folding laundry, watering the plants. Anything that kept her hands moving so her thoughts wouldn't spiral. But even as she busied herself, she kept replaying the way Daniel had said. "You don't have to be the strong one all the time." Those words wouldn't leave her. By the time Mark returned home later that afternoon, Elena had managed to wrap her emotions tightly enough that everything appeared normal again. He kissed her cheek. "Hey, sweetheart. How was your day?" She gave a small smile. "Quiet. Yours?" "Busy," he said with a tired exhale. "But manageable." They cooked dinner together, talked about weekend plans, and laughed about something their neighbor had done. Everything flowed easily, comfortably. But beneath it all, she felt a slight tension in her chest. Not caused by anything Mark did, but by everything she didn't say. After dinner, as they washed the dishes side by side, Mark glanced at her unexpectedly. "You seem a little off today," he said gently. Elena froze for half a second. "Off? How?" He shrugged lightly. "I don't know. Just a feeling." She forced a smile. "I'm okay. Just tired." He accepted the answer with a nod, trusting her because trust was something they had built over years. He didn't push. He didn't question. But that night, when she lay beside him in the dark, she couldn't stop thinking. If Mark noticed something was different, then the feeling wasn't just in her head. The next day passed quietly. She went grocery shopping, answered emails, took a walk in the afternoon sun. Nothing unusual happened. Until evening. Around sunset, when she was preparing dinner, she heard a gentle knock on the front door. Not loud. Not urgent. Just familiar. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets, expression calm but slightly hesitant. "Hey," he said softly. "I wasn't sure if you'd be home." Her heart skipped, not in a dramatic, romantic way, but in a startled, nervous way. She wasn't expecting him. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Daniel nodded. Yes. I just thought I should stop by. I didn't like how we left things yesterday. She stepped aside to let him in. He walked into the living room slowly, looking around as if making sure he wasn't intruding. They stood facing each other, the soft glow of the setting sun spilling across the walls. Elena, he began, voice steady but quiet, I owe you an explanation. Her breath caught. He took another small step toward her, still respectful, still careful, but close enough that she felt the sincerity in every word he spoke next. I should have told you what I meant to say yesterday, he said. You deserve the truth, even if it's not easy for me to say. Her chest tightened again, that same quiet warning she felt the night he paused in the kitchen doorway. She swallowed softly. What truth? She whispered. Daniel looked at her with a depth she had never seen from him before. And in that moment, she knew. Whatever he was about to say would change something. Maybe something small. Maybe something important. But something. He took a breath, opened his mouth to speak. And just then, the sound of keys jingling at the front door made them both turn sharply. Mark was home early, and the words Daniel meant to confess were suddenly suspended in the air between them. Dangerously close. And painfully unfinished. Some moments arrive at the worst possible time. Not because they're wrong, but because life doesn't pause just because two people need clarity. That's exactly what happened when Mark's keys jingled in the doorway. Daniel stepped back instantly, not out of guilt, but out of respect. He knew his timing had already pushed the edge of what felt appropriate. Elena's heart pounded softly in her chest. The confession Daniel had been carrying hovered in the air behind her, unfinished and unresolved. Mark stepped inside with his usual bright smile. Hey. I didn't expect to see you here, Dan. Daniel returned the smile, though his eyes held a quiet heaviness. Yeah, I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by. Mark dropped his keys on the little wooden tray by the door and walked over to give his brother a friendly pat on the shoulder. Good timing. Stay for dinner? Daniel glanced briefly at Elena. Her expression was calm, composed, but her eyes were still a little wide, unsure. He turned back to Mark. I can't tonight, he said gently. I actually was just about to head out. That quick? Mark joked. You didn't even sit down. Daniel let out a soft laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. Next time, he promised. He moved toward the door, then paused just long enough for Elena to feel the weight of the goodbye he wasn't saying aloud. Take care, both of you, he said quietly. And then he left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house fell into a stillness that made Elena realize just how much tension she'd been holding in her chest. Mark didn't seem to notice. He started talking about work, dinner plans, weekend errands, all the everyday things that normally grounded her. And she listened. She smiled. She responded. But inside, one thought pulsed gently. Daniel tried to tell me something important. Later that night, after Mark fell asleep beside her, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling again. The silence felt different this time. Heavier. But also clearer. She wasn't confused about her marriage. She loved Mark steadily, faithfully, without question. But she also couldn't ignore that Daniel had seen something inside her she hadn't shown anyone. And he cared enough to say something. The next morning, she made a quiet decision. She needed to hear the truth, whatever it was, not because she wanted anything to change, but because unfinished words always find a way to echo forever. She waited until Mark left for work. Then she sat at the kitchen table, took a steady breath, and sent Daniel a simple message. Can we talk? Just to clear the air. He replied within minutes. Yes. I'm on my way. It surprised her how quickly her heartbeat steadied after reading those words. Not excitement. Not nerves. Just relief. When Daniel arrived, he stood in the doorway for a moment, like he wasn't sure if he should step inside. Elena, he said softly, before anything else, I'm sorry for yesterday. I never wanted to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, she replied just as softly. I just didn't understand what you were trying to say. And it's worse not knowing. Daniel took a quiet breath and finally walked inside. They sat at the dining table, sunlight brushing across the wood in long, gentle streaks. For the first time since this whole confusing shift began, Daniel looked her directly in the eyes, steady, calm, sincere. "I didn't come here to hurt you," he said. "And I'm not here to create any distance between you and Mark. He's my brother. I care about both of you." Elena nodded, waiting. Daniel clasped his hands together, searching for the right words. "I wanted to tell you," he started slowly, "that I've noticed something changing in you. Not something bad, just a heaviness. A kind of quiet sadness you don't talk about." She felt her throat tighten. "It's not because of Mark," she whispered. "I know," Daniel replied gently. "But it still matters." A long pause followed. Then Daniel said the words he'd been holding. "I care about you, Elena. Not in the wrong way. Not in a way that crosses lines. I care because you're family and because sometimes you seem like you're carrying everything alone." The tension in her chest melted, replaced by something warm and safe. He didn't love her secretly. He didn't have feelings he shouldn't. He wasn't trying to confess something forbidden. He simply cared. Deeply. Quietly. Honestly. The relief washed over her so suddenly she had to blink back the emotion rising in her eyes. "Daniel," she said softly, "thank you. Truly. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to just see me." He gave a small, warm smile. "That's all I wanted to tell you. No drama. No hidden intentions. No lingering tension. Just truth." They talked for a little while longer about stress, about routine, about how easy it was to lose yourself in taking care of everyone else. By the time Daniel stood to leave, the air between them felt clear. Light. "Are we okay?" he asked. "We're more than okay," she said with a gentle smile. "Thank you for not giving up on saying what you needed to say." He nodded once, then stepped out into the bright morning, leaving her with a quiet peace she hadn't felt in weeks. When she closed the door, Elena exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her settle. Nothing had changed in her marriage. Nothing had shifted between her and Daniel in a way that crossed boundaries. But something inside her had finally found clarity. Sometimes the truth isn't meant to shake your world. It's meant to steady it. And that was exactly what Daniel's honesty had done. Her home felt calm again. Her heart felt lighter. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt understood, truly, quietly understood.